I'm going to be doing a presentation on my soil purificator by me. Okay, so the problem I'm tackling is oil spills that contaminate the land. Next slide. So, why are oil spills such a big deal in the world? Well, one, they happen often. There are tons of oil spills that happen around the world, many of which they're not really talked about because they're either too small or in places that you wouldn't really go to. So that's why they're not really heard about. And so they affect the environment and they affect like people's lives and jobs, and they're very devastating. So now, so let's look at in the environment. So the impact on the ecosystems is very strong. So the impact on the environment is that living things there, they can no longer live there because of just how toxic the oil spills are and the compounds that they have in there. So those the plants and animals that live in those ecosystems end up dying off or having to move to a different location because it's just not a place where they can thrive anymore. And also it becomes because the impacts can be so strong, naturally, for the ecosystem to naturally heal itself, it can be impossible just on its own nature to heal on its own. So that's why we would have to intervene to help revitalize the ecosystem. Next. So now, for people, the health effects can be really devastating. So they can cause many different kinds of diseases that kill people. For a pregnant woman, it can cause genetic disorders or genetic mutants for the newborn because of the compounds when you inhale the smoke from the oil. And so then the other thing is that it can increase certain risks in disorders like leukemia for kids. Now for jobs, this can ruin agriculture jobs and businesses because if the oil seeps into the soil where you're growing your crops, they can't really grow anymore. So that kind of ruins the chance of making money and selling them to the market because they're toxic now and they could get people sick. And so this could also ruin fishermen, local fishermen jobs, or just the fishing business in general or other small local areas jobs, because of just how devastating the oil spill is and how it affects the ecosystem. So if your job is so dependent on the environment and that gets damaged, you can't really make money. You can't really make money off of that. So it kind of can ruin your job. Also, if you're sick, and an example in Ecuador, in the Ecuador Amazon rainforest, if there's some native people that have gotten sick from these oil spills that's been occurring over there, that they've been having to take time off of their work to go and get themselves treated. And so because there's only a few places where there's really good hospitals because it's not that well of a developed country, they can lose their jobs and lose the chance to support their family and could even die, and then there's nobody to support their children. And it's really sad because there's no way to really help them unless you're there to support them. So that's why this is such a big deal and such important to really take care of. So next slide. So now let's look at the specific effects for your health. So oil spills can cause many different kinds of cancers, such as rectum, soft tissue cancers, colon cancers, rectum, liver, and even more. And these can be really devastating. And so, example, in the Ecuador Amazon rainforest, there's only one hospital in the country that can deal with cancer. And so it's really far away for those people, and some of them don't really have the money to afford to go there. So there's almost no way to treat them. And the plants or the medicine that's available in the environment that could be treated are either destroyed by the spills or are just really toxic to intake. And sometimes they're forced to do that because there's no other way to treat them. In some places of the world, like in Ecuador, leukemia childhood rates have increased by 4 times higher than any other region in the world because of these kinds of spills, and they're not being treated. And so some short-term effects of these oil spills, short-term health effects would be like headache, vomiting, nausea, confusion. Those are kind of some short terms, but some long term. So now for increasing risks, they can increase risk in skin infections and lung irritations. So now for the specific environmental effects. So in where the oil spills are in that contaminated area, those toxic compounds that the animals end up absorbing or eating, when they die, it stays with them. And so because like the predators will eat the prey, that kind of goes into their system as well. So it kind of builds up into the food chain. And so like the higher up the food chain you go, the more toxic chemicals that are in there, and like the more like percentage of toxicity in those animals are, the higher up you go. And so like for people who hunt and eat off like the animals in those environments right there, if they go up into a higher food chain, they're more likely to get sick. This is why it's so like dangerous for like people like native people and like the Amazon or whatever. So now for your crops or your plants, they can't really thrive as well in the soil because like it's toxic, and like the fertilizers that are there to get those nutrients are either destroyed or are toxic. So the plants can either end up dying or they absorb those compounds. So that way, like when you eat them or you sell them to the market, those people that eat them can probably get sick because of how like they've absorbed the toxic compounds through the roots. And so because, like I've said again, the contaminations can be so strong, the environment, it can make it nearly impossible to revitalize those habitats, making them kind of lost forever, which can be really horrible because you lose new species that like in the rainforest that we haven't even discovered yet can be lost forever. And like for people there, some native tribes that choose to stay hidden can be gone forever, and knowledge of the rainforest can be lost forever, and we would never know unless we try to discover it ourselves. Next slide. So my solution to these oil spills is my soil purificator. This product will be used to help assist in cleanup projects because they take so long and are so costly. So try to help be like a cheaper, more effective, and natural solution to these oil spills. So my soil purificator has two versions. There's a warm climate version and a cold climate. The warm climate version is for places that's like kind of warm, and like it's made out of austenitic stainless steel. Now for the cold version, it's made the same stainless steel, but it has a warm insulator that's made out of the wool made of sheep and cellulose. The reason why we have insulator is because the bacteria that we use to dissolve the oil that's contaminated, it has to be kept in a warm temperature and in a warm environment in order for it to thrive and keep consuming that oil. So yeah, next slide. So how my product works is that, so we have a conveyor belt right here. So this is like more of a visual, but what it would have is like it has a conveyor belt that pulls in the container or the thing that would pull in the contaminated soil. So once it moves into like the bacteria sector of the machine, which would probably be like in the middle, the bacteria would then be released into the soil and would start decontaminating the soil and eating up all those toxic compounds. After that, once it's done, it moves out and is then moved out once it's done purifying. So that's how this machine works. So now, just for showing how the whole process would go. So it's moved there and it's kind of set up. Once it's set up, we clean up the soil. Once a few X amount of days of the cleanup process of the bacteria, we take it back. We take a sample of the soil for testing, to make sure that those compounds are gone. Once we have agreed that they are gone, then we move the soil out of the machine and take it to a temporary storage site until all of like the contaminated area is clean. Once it's then clean, we then dump it back into the area, and then we end up doing the last final check just to make sure that everything is fine, and then we pack up and leave. So yeah. And also for the connections with English, I made a research paper to kind of show the research and the process of just like how like important the effect, like the real effects of like people have been, and the Ecuador Amazon rainforest have been, and also like how the process of how I've been building this. And so for my for human geography, I kind of related this back to more like the environment, and how like if like the environment's kind of damaged, it kind of like affects places like LDCs, how like they're not so developed, so they can't really treat them as well, and so it's kind of harder for like the people to kind of help grow the development of those countries. So it's really harder, and because they have less money, they can't really develop as fast, and so it's harder for them. And then for chemistry, I kind of put this back to, we would have lessons about like how like what like the construction of like the chemical compounds of the oil is, and how the solution when it's mixed, if it's in solution or non-solution, and how it kind of shows that why it's so hard just on its own for like oil that's in water for them to be separated, and why that's such a big deal in like the Gulf of Mexico or somewhere where like the Deep Horizon spill happened, why it's such a big deal and so hard and costly to try and clean this up. And then for math, I did a cost-effective evaluation comparing other solutions to my solution, how my solution is more cost-effective and cheaper to solving this problem than other solutions are. So yes, that's it. Thank you.